Cyclone Kenneth. Greenpeace says it is time now to accept that climate change will only increase the severity of extreme weather conditions. We talked to Happy Khambule. He is a senior political advisor at Greenpeace, and he joins me now live in our studios. Good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for coming through.
Good afternoon to you too.
Now, it is, of course, really devastating to see what is happening in Mozambique. Within a few weeks of Cyclone Idai, they experiencing Cyclone Kenneth.
I think the first thing to say is that our hearts go out to everybody who's being impacted by this. We know that it was just yesterday, as you said, we were talking about Idai, but Kenneth has come with a greater severity. I mean, we hardly ever talk about within the southern hemisphere, at least in South Africa and in Southern Africa, about category 4 cyclones or wind gusts of that kind. So what is actually happening is more or less a phenomena which is maybe, and what we're looking at is going to become more often and regular.
Yeah, and part of what you're saying as Greenpeace is this is as a result of climate change, which is something that some leaders do not really want to engage in.
I think the leaders don't want to engage in this because it's the actual appreciation of the problem becomes a lot. Because as soon as you agree that climate change is happening, the first thing you need to do is what is wrong, what has happened, and what is going to happen.
There've got to be plans put in place.
There has to be plans, and there has to be money put aside. And with all of that, it means that we have to change a few things. And when I say a few things, then I mean a few big things we will need to change if we're going to be addressing climate change.
School us a little bit on those things that would have to be changed. Should our leaders really have the will to consider climate change a threat to the African continent?
Well, there's mainly three things that need to be considered. The first one is, what are we doing as African countries, and particularly South Africa is one of the biggest economies within Africa, that is contributing to climate change, meaning our greenhouse gas emissions, which are directly linked to global temperature increases. The second part is, since we know that climate change is not going to be happening in the future, it's actually happening now, and we've got data that shows that it has been happening for quite some time since we realized what it is. What are we doing to adapt to climate change? So meaning that we can't always build houses in the same place as where the house, there's a video that's going around where a house is falling off.
That's in KZN.
We'll no longer be able to build houses there because those areas are becoming unlivable or are just becoming insecure. And then the last thing is, if we can't adapt and we can't reduce our impact or our contribution onto climate change, what are we going to do with all the losses that are going to be incurred by people? People are unable to live in certain places, we can't plant in certain areas, and as well as people losing lives.
True. As you say, everything that I've mentioned really needs money, not just money, but lots and lots of money. Where do you think African leaders should start? What should their point of departure be in tackling this climate change and really, accepting that it's here to stay?
If you had asked me this 5 years ago, we would have said to reduce our emissions immediately, because at the stage we believed that we wouldn't be impacted as much as we have right now. But right now it's about telling people about what is going to happen, being very frank about what the science says. And the science says these things are going to get worse, and what kinds of impacts we're going to be getting, and what can we do to weather those impacts. Do we have to move? Do we have to build different types of buildings? And are we still going to be doing the things that we've been doing that led us to this situation?
Right, so we failed as the nation to be proactive towards this problem.
Definitely.
It's just a matter of reacting to what will happen going forward.
Precisely.
But then, is there enough education really on climate change? I mean, we're sitting here with so many heavy polluters who continue to go unchecked.
Yeah. There's enough education out there. There isn't enough political will. And maybe, if I'm more frank, is that there must be an awareness that is shared across the population about what climate change is and how we are each contributing to it. But largely, it's about holding those who have contributed to climate change to account.
Yeah.
Particularly
I
our
think that's
heavy
the problem. Hence, I say that they still go unchecked. Nothing accountability, nothing.
Yeah, there's no accountability, but also there isn't the realization on their part that what they're doing is wrong. And our leaders themselves aren't holding them not necessarily into account, but giving them direction into, you have to innovate. If you want to continue doing what you're doing and not necessarily lead us into more climate change and more catastrophic disasters, you need to innovate or you need to stop doing what you're doing. Yeah. And that would mean also having a conversation with entities like ESCOM to say, you are contributing to the prevalence of climate change. What are you doing either to stop what you're doing or to innovate yourself out of the situation?
And those conversations are not being had.
I think they're not being had at the right levels enough. There's enough conversations that are happening internally within Eskom and with other entities such as Sasol and other big polluters, but they're not happening at the level that we need them to be. For example, if we look at many of the manifestos that have come out leading up to the elections, climate change is very scant. And if it is in there, it's about the idea that is going to happen in years and years and years later.
Yeah. So we've seen, of course, what happened in KwaZulu-Natal, the Eastern Cape, and some parts of the Free State province as well. So how do we avoid such incidents going forward? As you say that it looks like there is no political will here in South Africa specifically. Let's just talk about it here home. What should happen?
So South Africa, fortunately and unfortunately, we've got this dichotomy or this problem where we've got amazing plans and amazing policies that could be implemented, could change the very landscape that we live in, but the implementation is really bad. So the basic thing is to implement the basic policies that we have around climate change, as well as the mix of measures that have been developed in order to deal with climate change. And then the second part is essentially to elevate this problem of climate change as much as we've elevated poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Because essentially what climate change does is that it makes those three triple challenges even worse.
Even worse, yeah, true. But also there's also some international tension around this issue of climate change.
That's
is
true,
it really impacting on how our African leaders are really viewing this issue?
Yes, I think psychologically what the African leaders are going through is a kind of a debate with international partners about dependency, that we need these means of implementation, so finance, technology, and capacity building in order to deal with climate change. But then when they come back home is that they don't report back and tell us what they are willing to do with the resources that we have. So it's, if the United States and the developed countries aren't able to deal with this climate change problem, then we can't do anything about it because we're too small. But there is something that we can do about climate change, even at our level.
So there is light at the end of the tunnel.
There is light, but we need to start now, or else we're going to be stuck in the situation where we're talking about another big hurricane or a big cyclone or another flood.
All right, Happy, we'll leave it at that for today. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you very much.
All right, many thanks there to my guest, Happy Khambule. He's a senior political advisor at Greenpeace, talking to us about climate change really and the effects and what we're starting to see on the African continent as a result of climate change.